Okay. Okay, we got to keep going. Yomru dvar shvua mipi ba'olam hazeh. If they will repeat a Torah, Yiratzon, he prays to God. I wholly hope, says David, that when they say the halacha in my name, by quoting my name, I will be able to live in another world. In other words, even though I'm in another world, I'll live in this world. How can I live in this world if I'm already gone? Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai called Talmid Chacham. She'omrim dvar shmua mipiv b'olam hazeh sivsosav dovavros ba'kever. It's as if his lips, his mouth is moving in the kever, even though he's dead. So he's alive in this world because we're saying over his rulings, his Torah in this world. And therefore, says Rabbi Yochanan, I could be living in this world even after I'm dead, if only my Talmidim would get used to saying the Torah in my name. And that's why I was mocked. But now that I see it was not necessary because they understood that everything Rabbi Elazar said, it was in the name of his Rebbe, Rabbi Yochanan, then I'm calmed down. And you may know, gentlemen, that I published a book after my father's death called Dovev Misharim. And it's based on this Gemara that we just learned. Dovev, that my father's lips should be still moving in the kever, even after his death, by publicizing his Torah. And his name was Dov. So it's Rabbi Yochanan Zeira V'Teva Shimon Nazira. Those were the days when there was still Nazirim around. In our century, it's very rare. Did you know a Nazir? Did you ever meet one? I met a Nazir when I was 16 years old. Mikra, what's the pasuk that tells me that Sfasav Dovos Bakever, that his lips are moving even though he's gone? And now the Gemara is going to quote a pasuk in Shir Hashirim. What does it say? Shir Hashirim v'chichech ki yein hatov holech l'dodi l'meisharim dovev sifsei yishenim. What's v'chichech? Chichech is a reference to Torah. And kiyin is yayin. Yayin is also compared to Torah. And just like yayin is dovev, if you've ever seen, fresh wine after the squeezing, the pressing of the grapes, it starts bubbling. And so too, there's dovev sifsei yeshenim. The wine of Torah will create a kind of a bubbling in the mouth and the lips of the yeshenim, those who are asleep, meaning those who are gone. Kikomer shalavonit. Like if you put a heavy beam onto grapes and it starts pressing the grapes, if the yayin that squeezes out from the grapes because of the weight of the beam, you put your finger in there and it starts bubbling. This is the law of physics. If we say something in their name in this world, so they are like the yayin of chichech and like the dovev sifsei yeshenim. And now we go back to the Mishnah. Could you please remind me? I don't remember what time we end.
3:10 your time.
3:10. Okay, we're still alive. Okay. Remind me at the end of the shift, if we have time, I want to tell you a story about Schwitz. I'm sweating. I have a very good story about it. Anyway, Bobby, you'll appreciate it because it comes from the mouth of the world's worst fundraiser. Okay. Echad ben Teisha Shanim. Okay, now the Mishnah talks about what's called a saris. A saris is someone who reaches the age of 20 and he doesn't have shtei saros. He doesn't have pubic hairs. And he has the same status in halacha as a katan. So the Gemara asks the following stira from a different Mishnah, this time in Masechet Nida. I have a Mishnah in Masechet Nida that says, Ben Esrim Shana Shalo Hevi Shtei Saros. Yaviu Raya Shu Ben Esrim. Now watch what happens. Who's bringing the Raya to try to prove that he's already a Saros? The answer is, these are the Krove HaYevamot. Right? She falls for Yibum. and she can't marry anyone else until she gets chalitza or yibum. They want to prove that the yavam, the surviving brother, is a saris, and therefore there's no yibum, because a saris is excluded from zikas yibum. In other words, there's no need for neither chalitza nor yibum. She can marry anyone min hashuk.
Why were we talking about 9-year-olds doing yibum?
Because a 9-year-old, since he doesn't have the status of a gadol in any halacha whatsoever, except for maybe in the Darim, but in Kol Kula, he's a katan if he's 9 years old. He's not capable of a kinyan, no matter how genius he is. And he has the status of a katan, and therefore his maisa yibum, his bia, is not enough to generate a kinyan ishus and clinch and fulfill the mitzvah of yibum. And there's another case of a katan, which is also mentioned in our Mishnah, and that's a 20-year-old who does not have pubic hairs. Bas esrim shana shelo hevia shtei saros. Now a girl is 20 years old, she doesn't have saros, and she falls for yibum. Yavi raya, let them bring her birth certificate. Right? Shehi bas esrim. Vehi ha-islandess. And she is the islandess. She has the status of an islandess. She's 20 years old without any saros. Lo choletzes v'lo b'siabena. She doesn't need neither chalitza nor yibum. We're going to prove from this Mishnah in Nida that a ben esrim shana shelo hevi shtei saros, he's considered like a gadol who's a saris, not like a katan. Our Mishnah says that if he's a ben esrim shana, he didn't bring saros, then he has the status of a katan. Just one second. Oh, I'm sorry. I missed one important point. Thank God I caught myself. What did our sugya see in our Mishnah? By virtue of the analogy between Ben Esrim, Shlohevi Shtei Saras, and a Katan, we understand that this Ben Esrim will become a Gadol. Otherwise, the analogy to a Katan is imprecise. A Katan is someone who will become a Gadol. And yet, the Mishnah in Nida assumes that at the age of 20, boom, his 20th birthday, he has no saros, he is a saris. Our Mishnah seems to assume that there's some later age in which he can become a gadol. And the story is not finito with 20th birthday. And the Gemara says, Ha'itmar Allah, we had a comment of Rab Shmuel Bar Yitzchak HaMarav to interpret the Mishnah, that Mishnah Nida, that why is a Ben Esrim considered a saris? As we said, finito, that's over, because who should know the lo simone saros? Not only is he lacking 2 saros, but he also has simone srisus. That has to do with his voice and other things. So therefore, we establish him as a saris right then and there, as soon as he reaches the age of 20. Why? Because again, he not only is lacking 2 saras, but he's also exhibiting simone saris.
So, sorry, Rabbi, without the simanim, he's just a potential saris?
Correct. Without simone saris, we're going to wait until his 35th birthday, as we'll see down the line. And then we're going to establish him as a gadol. So right now he's a katan. But if on the other end he already had simone saris, then at the age of 20, we already established him as a saris, period. Omar Rava, Deka Nami, I'm going to be medayik from the Lashon of the Mishnah, that we're talking about a case where he has simone saris, the katani, the hu ha-saris. The hey of the hey ayidiyah of ha-saris indicates that we know he's a Saris. That is the Saris, meaning he's already been established as a Saris. And what does that mean? Because he had Simoni Saris. Ishmamina, we see from this that the Mishnah is talking about a case where he had Simoni Saris. You want to ask, wait a minute, V'chilo nol dulo Simoni Saris. What happens if he doesn't have Simoni Saris? So he's saying he's still a Katan, even though he's 20 without Shtei Saris, but he's on his way to becoming a Saris, to becoming a God. At what point in time do we finally say we have enough patience with you? You don't have Saris, you're a Saris. And the Gemara answers, Ad Kama, V'chilo no dulo Simoni Saris, Ad Kama, Tani de Rav Chia, Ad Rov Shnosov, until most of his life has passed by. And the Gemara is assuming that the average life is 70 years old. And therefore, most of your life would be after the age of 35. So imagine, from the Gemara's perspective, a 35-year-old is already over the hill. Okay. Kiyasa Lakami de Rava, when a 20-year-old came in front of Rava and he didn't have he didn't have Shtei Saros, and Rava had to determine his status. Rava would have to be bodek. Does he have Shtei Saros? Does he not have Shtei Saros? This was his minhag. They came to Rava and they said he doesn't have Shtei Saros. Is he therefore a katan? So Rava would paskin, if he's a weak young man, weak meaning he's very thin, pale, perhaps lethargic, then Amalahu, Rava would say, Zil, Avriu, feed him, fatten him up, and then maybe he'll bring Shtei Saros. So in other words, the weakness of a child might lead to a situation where he does not develop his pubic hairs at the right time. The bari, and if he's we call it in Yiddish a zaftiger guy, he's a pretty fat fellow, Amalu Rava would say, Zil akchashu, put him on a diet. And then when he gets thin and he's normal weight, he will develop 2 saros. And the reason is the hani simonim, these simonim of 2 saros, zimnin, sometimes in Nasrei, they fall off. Because he may have had 2 saros, but they fell off. Why did they fall off? Machmas chishusa, because he was so weak and skinny. Zimnin de Nasrei machmas priyusa. And sometimes if you're too fat, it could also lead to this situation where the Shtei Saros fall. Hadron Alecha Perek Ha'isha Rabba. Now we start the 11th Perek, which is Nosim Al Hanusa. And anyone who tells you that Yevamot gets easier as you go along, challenge him to teach you this Perek. Okay, Perek Achadasar. Nosim Al Hanusa. And don't be fooled by the first sugi. The first sugi is a cinch. But then forget it. Okay. Let's go on. Nosim Al Hanusa v'al Mafuta. We have various relatives of our wife that are prohibited to us. You can't marry your wife's mother, your wife's daughter, your wife's sister, as long as your wife is alive, And what happens in a case where a man did not marry a woman, which would generate an Isser on her krovos, her daughter, her mother, or sister, but rather he raped a woman or he seduced a woman. So he had an out-of-wedlock sexual escapade with this woman, and then he's allowed to marry her relatives. Interesting, no? A man seduces a woman, he's allowed to marry this woman's mother. It's not his shviga. But ha'ones v'mafatal and esua chayav. What happens if she's in a esua, full-fledged marriage? And the Torah says that after you marry a woman, you're not allowed to marry her relatives. What about a case of ones umafata? Right? He didn't marry his ex-wife's mother. He raped his ex-wife's mother. Chayav. That's called ba al krovas ishta. So again, just to summarize the Mishnah, in the Reish of the Mishnah, a woman who's an anutza, that doesn't generate an iser on her krovas. You're allowed to marry a krovas. The flip side, however, on a nesua, the krovos of a nesua, you're not, even if you rape them or seduce them, you're chay. Now the Mishnah continues. And now the Mishnah is going to present a machlokas between the Tanakh and Rabbi Yehuda. No say Adam, according to the liberal, permissive view of the Chachamim, anusas aviv umefutas aviv, anusas beno umefutas beno. A man is allowed to marry a woman who had a relationship with his own son, but it was out of wedlock. And not only that, imagine a man wants to marry a woman who had a sexual relationship with his own father. He's allowed to do so if this woman was not married to his father. So Eishes Aviv, according to Tanakama, only applies if there was Ishus, but not Ones Umefata. Rabbi Yehuda Oser Banusas Aviv Futas Aviv. In the case where he wants to marry a woman who had a relationship with his father, even if it was Ones Umefata, he's not allowed to have such a relationship. The Gemara says, Tanina, we learned in our Mishnah. Lahad Tanur Rabbanan. Let's compare our Mishnah to a Brisa. And the Brisa says, Onas Isha. A man raped a woman. Mutar Lisa is Bita. He's allowed to marry her daughter. Very much reiterates what we learned in our Mishnah. Nasa Isha. But once he marries a woman, also Lisa Bita. He's not allowed to marry her daughter. So the Gemara asks the following kasha. Uraminu. We're going to ask a kasha from a brisa on the Mishnah. A nitan mina isha, a man who's suspect of having a sexual escapade with a woman. That's called yotzol of kol. There's a rumor floating around that he had relations with this woman. She's not even married. Osir be'ima be'bita b'chosa. He's not allowed to marry any of her krovos. Why? Our Mishnah just established that, with the exception of Rabbi Yehuda in the case of Anusas Aviv, you're allowed to marry the relatives of a woman that you had a relationship with out of wedlock. And Nita Mina Isha is exactly that. So the Gemara answers that when the Brisa says that he's not allowed to marry the woman that he had sexual relationship with, he can't marry her mother, her sister, or her daughter. That's a case of what? Of the Rabbanan. On a Torah level, it's mutter, but the Rabbanan prohibited. And this is called Gzeira. Etc. Basically, what happens is that the Chazal were afraid that if a man is suspect of having a loose relationship with a woman, then if he marries her close relatives, then by the nature of family relations, that woman that he's accused and suspected of having a relationship with floats around the house. You know, there's simchas, they make a pidyon bed, and they make a bris at home. And therefore, we're afraid that he's going to violate an Iser Lav Doraisa of a relationship with Krovas Ishto. Because as we said before, if he marries a woman, full-fledged marriage, and he has a relationship with her daughter, that's it. That's a very severe Iser. So Gemara asks the kasha b'chol heicha de'ika isura midrabanan tani nosim lechatchila. I don't get it. Our Mishnah says nosim al hanusa. Nosim sounds like lechatchila. He's allowed to marry the relative of his anusa. And you're telling me now that it's also b'Rabbanan? And the Gemara answers, Tani, what you should learn in our Mishnah is nosim lechatchila. So now we're really stuck because we quoted a brisa that says that b'Rabbanan it's prohibited. And now you're telling me that the word nosim in our Mishnah means even lechatchila. There's an irreconcilable contradiction between our Mishnah and the brisa. And the answer is kitanan masnisim. When the Mishnah says nosim, it's li'achar misa. Once his anusa or mafuta dies, then even b'Rabbanan, we lift the Isa to marry our krovos because she's not going to be there at the, local bat mitzvahs because she's gone. She's in a different world. Gemara now asks me, with regard to all the dinim in our Mishnah, that a man is only usher in the krovos of his nesua, where there was a full-fledged marriage, but not of a mafuta or an anusa. Where do we know that from? The Tan Rabban of Akulan in all the Arayos in Parshas Kedoshim, including Kaloso, Dodoso, Zachor, Behema, Nemar, Lashon, Shchiva. Like it says, V'ish ki yishkav es so-and-so, es Kaloso. But V'kan, when it comes to marrying a woman and her daughter, Nemar kicha. The Torah says, V'ish, not ish asher shachav es isha, but ish asher yikach es isha, es ima. So whenever you see the language of kicha, that's a reference to the full-fledged marriage relationship. The Isser is violated with a derech likuchim, meaning through Kedusha. So again, just to summarize, the drasha is, why did the Torah go out of its way to change the language from shchiva to kicha, to teach you that these relatives are only prohibited if there was a kicha, if there was a marriage? Amalei Rav Papa Abaye, Ela me'ata. Based on this drasha of kicha, what about achoso? Are you going to tell me that a man is allowed to have a relationship with his sister as long as it's not a marriage relationship? Because again, l'gabi achoso dichsiv v'isha asher yikach es achoso bas aviv o bas ima. Inami v'der kichu da'aser der shchiva shari. Is he allowed to have a relationship with her outside the framework of marriage? We never heard such a thing. Amalei Sabai responds to Papa, Likuchin ksivi b'Torah stam. We don't know what the word likuchin means. It's one of these dangling modifiers. And you have to put it into context. Haroy likicha, kicha. Haroy l'shchiva, shchiva. If a man marries a woman and her daughter, that's called Isha ve'ima. Or Isha v'achosa, a woman and her sister. Now we could use the language of kicha. Why kicha? Because it's royally kicha. So therefore, we introduce the condition of marriage. But in a place where it's royal shchiva, in other words, in achoso, everybody knows that you can't marry your own sister. There's no room for error over here. And therefore, we're going to interpret the meaning of shchiva as shchiva shelo keder kedusha. Why? Because here there's no possibility of interpreting the pasuk literally as kicha, because there is no kicha with achosa. So it's got to be referring to shchiva. But when you're talking about marrying a woman and her mother, there it's royal kicha. Rava Omar, he has a different Yalfusa.
Under what circumstance? I don't understand. The mother and the, how does that work?
He's saying,
In other words, you can possibly have kedushin with these two women, the mother and the daughter, separately. But with your sister, you can never have kedushin, no matter what.
so when you could have a woman that lends herself, she's nitfeses b'kedushin, then we're going to interpret the pasuk kicha literally as referring to kedushin, and therefore marrying a woman and a mother would only be prohibited through kicha. So you had a kicha, you had a full-fledged marriage with the mother, and now you want to marry the daughter. That's a violation. But there are cases like achosa, which is even impossible to dream of kicha of kedushin. There's never going to be kedushin with achosa. Rava Omar onas isha muta lisas bita. If a man raped a woman, he's allowed to marry her daughter. I'm going to derive it from here, not from the pasuk that you quoted earlier, but the Siv, it says ervas bas bincha o bas bitcha lo segala. And there are extra words in this pasuk. It says lo segala. So we're talking about a granddaughter, having a relationship with a granddaughter in one of two scenarios, either the daughter of your son or the daughter of your daughter. Habas bina dida ubas bita dida. Okay, so we're talking about ervas bas bincha bas bitcha. But on the other hand, it says uksiv ervas isho bitalo segala as bas binov as bas bitalo sika, which implies that they were prohibited, even though they're not b'nei. It's not bas bino ubas bito. Okay, time. How do we reconcile this stira? We have one pasuk that says that bas bina dida or bas bito dida is gully. He's allowed to be megala, the erva. Another pasuk says the opposite. And the Gemara reconciles by saying kan be onsim, but kan be nesuin. In the case of bas bino bas bita, where the Torah prohibits it, that's a case of kan be nesuin. And the Torah is telling me that not only is your daughter prohibited, but even your granddaughter is prohibited. But in a case of onsim, where it was only through ones, but not through kedushin, so then he's not chayav al bas bina or bas bita. So if a man rapes a woman, chas v'shalom, has seduction with a woman, then there's not going to be an iser of bas bina or bas bita. Frek the Gemara epach hadna. Whenever you have a contradiction to psukim, you could always interpret it the other way around. So the Gemara answers, "Harayo sher ksiv buhu b'nesuin deika she'er ba'onsim leka she'er." The Torah says, "Ervas isho bitolo segala," and it says, "Es bas binov es bas bitolo tzika kudalos ervoso she'era heina." And the word she'era means ishus, and in onsim it would not be appropriate for the Torah to use the word she'er, because there's no ishus in the case of onsim. Rabbi Yehuda oser bianusas aviv ubemefutas aviv. Omer Rav Gidol Amarav. My time is Rabbi Yehuda to see los yikach ish es eshes aviv v'lo yigala knaf aviv. There are four extra words. Lo yigala knaf aviv. What's the Torah adding here with lo yigala knaf aviv? Kanaf shera aviv lo yigala. So kanaf is like a skirt, it's referring to the sexual organs, and ra aviv, his father had a relationship with that kanaf. Lo yigala, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, that means he's not allowed to have a relationship with her who had a relation with her father of Yigala Knaf Aviv, even though it's outside the framework of wedlock. The Gemara asks, how do we know? How does Rabbi Yehuda know that this pasuk is referring to an anusa? It says Eishes Aviv in the pasuk. It sounds like it's his father's wife. It's not anusa. How do you know to go beyond the Torah and extend the Easter even to anusas Aviv? And the Gemara answers that Rabbi Yehuda derived it from the pasuk B'Siv Miluyei B'Kra, the previous pasuk. And in the previous pasuk it says V'Nasan. This is the parsha of Ones U'Mefateh. V'Nasan ha'Ish ha'Shochiv imo l'Avia nara chamishim kasef. So we're talking about a nara that was raped, and Rabbi Yehuda's Dorish Smichus. That here too in the pasuk Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv, we're talking about a woman who was raped by his father. For Rabbanon, they reject this drasha. What do they hold? If there were two psukim that were right next to each other, contiguous, with nothing in the middle, Kiddush, you'd be right. But hashta lo samachle, because it says lo yikach ish es eshes aviv, and then we have lo yigal knaf aviv, but before that we have v'nosana ish shokrev imos. So the entire pasuk lo yikach ish es eshes aviv is a mafsik, and it breaks up the continuity between v'nosana ish and lo yigal knaf aviv. And therefore, we're not going to accept this hekesh of Rabbi Yehuda, this smichus. So now the Gemara wants to know, what do the Chachamim do with the pasuk Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv? They need 4 extra words, Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv. And if you don't accept Rabbi Yehuda's smichus, because you hold that there's a wedge in between, then what are you going to do with the extra pasuk Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv? And the Gemara answers, when it says in the pasuk Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv, Bishomeres Yavam Shel Aviv HaKosu Medaber. In other words, his uncle, the brother of his father, died without children, and his aunt falls for Yibum. And the Torah is telling us that the son is not allowed to be miyabem his aunt, his father's brother's wife, right? His uncle's wife. And what is my knaf aviv? Knaf haroy la aviv lo yigal. This woman fell for Yibum to Aviv. She did not, or he did not consummate the marriage with her, but she's Ishomeres Yavam. And already there's an Easter of Lo Yigal. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, you are talking about the wife of your father's brother. The wife of your father's brother is Dodasa. The Tepekle Mishum Dodasa. Well, why are you telling me that this pasuk is teaching me Knaf Haroy Li Aviv, etc., which means the wife of his father's brother? We know that explicitly in the Torah. And the Gemara answers, Lavar Ola B'Shnei Lavan. And sometimes the Torah will repeat itself, so you know that you get 2 sets of malchus. And this is a methodology that appears throughout Shas, that sometimes the Torah will repeat the same lav in order to teach you that you get 2 violations of 2 lav. And there's a long literature here, how to reconcile this with the principle of Ein Iser Chalal Iser. In any event, wait a second. You're telling me that the Torah says V'nosana Isha Shochiv Imo Lavia Nara Chamishim Kasa. And now the Torah is prohibiting a relationship with your father's brother's wife, that relationship is excluded because of Yevamot Ashuk. You're talking about a case where a man died without children and his wife fell for Yibum. That's Yevamot Ashuk. Gemara says, Lavar olav b'shlosha lav. So you violated 3 different lavin. Ibai Seima, another possibility of lo yigalef kanaf aviv is based on the Gemara. Ibai Seima liachar misa. This is very sharp. The Gemara is saying like this: I can avoid this whole business of lavar olav b'shnei lavim and just tell you that his father died. His father was the Yavam, and lo yigala knaf aviv means a knaf, a kanaf that was royally aviv b'chayim. But right now, she's not skuka liyibum, and therefore the Isser of Yevamot Ashuk is completely null and void. So the Torah is coming to add a separate Isser of Dodaso, which normally would not apply. But again, we're coming back to the old principle of L'chai ve'olav b'shnei lavin. And here we start Daf Tzadi Zayin Amid Beis.